I always thought your first phone call should be to the mold remediation company, and that's not who you want to call. I'm going to make that case. Your first call needs to be to an indoor environmental professional. And if you're thinking like I was many years ago, I literally went, well, what's an indoor environmental professional, or an IEP for short? And here's what that person is. There should be no questions left to answer the day the remediation company shows up. I get people texting or emailing all the time like, oh my God, the remediation company's here right now and he wants to use this chemical. And I was like, no. Everything should have been agreed ahead of time by you, by your IEP and the remediator in writing.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Awakening Spaces podcast. Today I'm going to be talking to Kendra Seymour. She is the co-founder and vice chair of Change the Air Foundation. Change the Air is a foundation that advocates for our health by improving indoor air quality. And Kendra oversees the foundation initiatives, and she has a special focus on raising awareness, outreach, and fundraising. And as a mother of two, Kendra discovered hidden mold and water damage in her own home that was harming her family's health. So in this episode, we're really going to break down the proper way to inspect, remediate, and test your home so that you know exactly how to go through the process if you find mold in your home. And this is something that I see people accidentally making a mistake on that costs them lots and lots and lots of money that they could have saved. So I'm really excited to share this episode with you. Kendra does an amazing job breaking all of this down for us. And I'm sure that this is going to be an incredible resource for anyone going through the process. So without further ado, let's dive in. Hey, Kendra, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Ashley. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for our conversation today.
I am so excited. We met many, many years ago now through your work with Change the Air and just connected over sharing similar stories with mold. And so I was excited to bring you on because you have so much knowledge in the mold space. So I would love for you to just share who you are and what you do and what brings you to this space.
Yeah, no, I would love to. It's a very personal thing for me. And I'm lucky enough that I was able to take my pain and kind of turn it into a passion that became Change the Air Foundation. And for those who don't know, it's a nonprofit organization I co-founded with Brandon Chapo and Michael Rubino. And we really wanted to create an organization that empowers homeowners and renters to understand how the air in their home can make them sick and what they can do about it so that they can get back to living healthy lives and focusing on the things that they want to focus on, right? And not worried about if their home is making them sick. And so for me, this actually started probably close to 15 years ago. And it began when my husband and I went to buy our first house. Now, we thought we did everything right. We had a home inspection. We live in an area where the market's really competitive and there were multiple bids on this home. We'd been looking for a year and we couldn't believe this one was in our price range. It looked great. It was a flip, which should have been the first red flag. And our bid got accepted and we were ecstatic. And we had the home inspector come in and he found some moisture in the basement. And I remember we had arranged for the sellers to take care of it. And we got a phone call from our realtor. And she said, you know what? They opened up that basement wall with the moisture. Why don't you and your husband swing by after work? So we did. And so we're down in the basement, my husband and myself, our realtor, their realtor, and whoever this was, a handyman probably that they hired to open up this wall. And we're staring at a wall full of mold. And there's no protection and there's no containment. And I remember thinking at the time, like, is this safe? Should we be standing here? Like, these are professionals. If this wasn't safe, like, we wouldn't be here, right? And I happened to say something to my real estate agent, and the other real estate agent overheard. And she looked at me and said, listen, if this is a problem, there are two other offers in this folder that would be happy to see yours fall through. And I was devastated. I was like, "Oh, no." Like, I had pictured bringing my future children home one day to this home. And so we moved on with life, and from day 1 it of moving in the home, we knew that things weren't done right. Like, we'd run the dryer and all the lights would flicker throughout the home, So, we came to slowly find out that behind the pretty paint and exterior of this quote unquote "flip," there were a lot of problems that were hidden, and it meant as we went through this process, unfortunately, that we continued to make mistake after mistake because, 1, we trusted the professionals we hired, and 2, we just didn't know better. It's you don't know what you don't know, and it wasn't until my children were born and all their different health symptoms, and even then it took 4 years, before I started to finally connect the dots between our health and our home. I'm not saying everything that happened to us was directly a result of our home, but it was a big portion. We had to go through multiple remediations, some of them bad. And I'll get into some examples of that because I like to say to people, listen, on this journey, you're going to make mistakes.
Mm.
And that's okay. Give yourself some grace and move on. And if it's helpful to know, like I made every mistake possible and we're still here and we're still healthy. And so the reason for the foundation is I wanted to create an organization where you could find research-based, up-to-date, independent data that came without a sales pitch. And so at the foundation, we not only provide information for homeowners and renters, that help them understand how to deal with mold and water damage safely. We have free downloads and podcasts and articles. We have scholarships to online classes that we give out. But we also do a lot of work at the state and federal level to change the laws because we know that while it's important to empower consumers and who they hire and don't hire, we also know this is a systemic issue and it requires some large scale change. So we spend a lot of time at the state and federal level doing some policy work, and we can talk about that maybe a little later. And the last thing we do is we do fund small scale research. We know that this is an area that is too often overlooked, dismissed, and underfunded. So we're trying to make a difference there.
Oh my gosh, yes. Kendra, you what you guys have done and achieved with Change the Air is absolutely incredible. The resources, the free resources that are available are incredibly thorough, incredibly helpful, and things that I know that you and I both wish we probably had at the very, very beginning of our journey trying to figure out what is going on. So I'm going to go ahead and link all of those resources for you guys to access and to join their newsletter and all the good stuff that, will connect you to that organization because it's incredible. But you touched on it a little bit, and I'd love to go a little bit deeper on just the lessons that you learned and sort of the inspection remediation process. Can you give us like a clear guideline if someone was in your shoes? Like maybe take us back to if now that you know what you know now and you're going in for this home evaluation, like what are the right steps that should have been taken?
Yeah. So there like how much time do you have? Because there's so much to
Tons.
unpack there and like so much that I learned that I hope that people will learn from my mistakes and save themselves time and money and protect their health. So we'll start with some of the hard lessons learned. And I think the first one was just because you can't see mold or smell mold doesn't mean it's not there. I think a lot of people think that if I had a problem, it would be very obvious. And in most cases, mold is hidden. It's hidden in attics and crawl spaces and behind walls and under floors and in HVAC systems. And it's, I think, oftentimes out of sight, out of mind. Because what you end up seeing by the time you see something or smell something, it's usually just the tip of the iceberg. And so that was something that I had to learn the hard way because you couldn't see it in our house and you couldn't smell it. And the first indication of a bathroom that we had to remodel was a small stain, probably smaller than the size of a quarter. And behind that,
Mm.
once we got in there to remediate, it was a massive mold problem. But our indication was really relatively small and something that you would maybe think as a homeowner and renter, I'll get to that later. That's not that big of a problem. And so that was something I had to learn. I think the other thing that was hard is I didn't know who to trust. And this is why we'll get into some of the step-by-step support we provide at Change the Air Foundation, because you could pick up the phone and call 5 different companies, and you're gonna get 5 different solutions for your problem. And so then you're thinking, well, like, who's right? Because sometimes the information is very conflicting, and the prices can be, a huge range, and you're like, "Wow, okay, I don't know who to trust. Where do I even begin?" And I think the takeaway from my journey that I learned, it was that no one will care about my health and my home as much as me, which I take then to be empowering in the sense that I had to become my own advocate. I had to fight for my family. If the remediator made a mistake, he went home that at night. My family stayed in that home and paid the price. If the doctor dismissed us, my child suffered and continued to have symptoms. And so I really had to learn to become my own advocate, which is in a sense, a little different than what I was raised, because I was raised, you don't question the doctor, you don't question the contractor, they're the professional. And I thought, they know this is their job. And I realized that in many cases, when it's something like mold and water damage, whether it's how it impacts your health or even the physical inspection and removal, the industries are just not where they should be. And so there's a huge knowledge gap. So that was the other big thing. And so I had to learn that it was okay to ask questions. And one of the things that we'll talk about, and we can get into like, what are your steps? Because I wanted to break that down for people at the foundation. But I learned that if I asked a contractor questions, a red flag was, "Oh, don't worry. I've been in the industry 30 years." So instead of answering my question, they responded with the number of years they've been in the industry. I'm like, "That's great. And can you answer my question?" Or, I had a few people be like, "Well, is your husband home?" I'm like, "No, no, you're talking to me." And so learning to ask questions and not feeling bad about it if something wasn't clear. So let's zoom out then. Like, what do you do? If you are a homeowner or renter and you think you have a problem, you're not sure if you have a problem, maybe you have a little tiny stain in your ceiling and you're like, oh goodness, is it something more? Here's what I don't want you to do. We'll start with that, if that's okay. So, I
Mhm.
don't want you to panic because we've all been there. Panic does not help. I don't want you to spray it with bleach or vinegar or some sort of cleaner. Just don't disturb it. And I also don't want you to hire the first person you found on Google that had 5 stars, because these industries, and if I kind of had to distill the biggest problem with the inspection and remediation industry down to one thing, it would be it's like the Wild West. In most states, it's not regulated. It's not regulated at the federal level. So that means in many cases, I could go to bed tonight and wake up tomorrow and call myself a mold remediator. So you,
Wow.
as the homeowner, as the renter, you really need to take the time to vet and assess like these people you hire before you bring them in to do anything in your home. So I'll pause there before I go on to the 5 steps. But I think you and I both shared that we made a lot of mistakes, and
Mhm.
sometimes that's the cruelest teacher, but it's also helpful in the sense that, well, I know what not to do, so now moving forward, I'm not gonna make those same mistakes.
Yeah, it's so interesting. There's 2 things that jumped out just in that beginning piece that you shared, and 30 years being a red flag. I just talked about this on my last podcast episode, and I actually just posted an Instagram post on that yesterday
Oh,
because
no way!
that was so it's funny because it's like, what is that number? I feel like people will throw that number 30. They're like, "Yep, 30 sounds good." Like, that's we know what we're talking about. I hear that all the time. So I love that you brought that up. And then another thing is panic is not productive.
Yeah,
It's not productive. And it's almost like we have to make the choice.
yeah.
Okay, I know we feel like we want to panic, but we have to remember it's not productive for anybody. And, we just need to take a moment, take a beat so we can be productive. So I love that you shared all of that. And yes, I would love to hear and break this down, like what these steps are.
Yeah, so, you said it perfectly, like, the panic comes first for everyone. Even to this day, I will if there's a water event, like, my heart rate rises for a moment, and then I take a deep breath. I literally pause and take a deep breath, and then I do what I know I need to do, and so for you, the listener, it's I always say research before you react. So we created
Mhm.
at the foundation a start here section. And so I'm going to take you through some of that. But if you don't want to furiously take notes while you listen, you can find all that on our website. But we've broken it down into 5 steps. So I'll say each of the steps and then we can kind of unpack them a little bit more if you want. But the first step is to have your home inspected thoroughly by a knowledgeable indoor environmental professional, sometimes called an IEP for short. Step 2 is to have safe and effective remediation done. And we recommend at a minimum that's done by the IICRC S520 standards, which we can talk about that a little bit more and why that's important. Step 3 is you're going to bring back that IEP a second time. And they're going to do post remediation verification, which is just a fancy way of saying post testing. And then step 4 is you're gonna clean the rest of the home and your belongings, which is something that is so often missed, and address the HVAC if it wasn't addressed earlier. And then step 5, you reevaluate how you feel. You can work with a practitioner at that point. But for all those reasons you said, the panic, not knowing who to trust, we've tried our best to break this down into a step by step process. So let's start with that very first step, your first phone call. And I think this was the thing that probably shocked me the most is I always thought your first phone call should be to the mold remediation company. And that's not who you want to call. I'm going to make that case. Your first call needs to be to an indoor environmental professional. And if you're thinking like I was many years ago, I literally went, "Well, what's an indoor environmental professional or an IEP for short?" And here's what that person is. So it's first helpful to know that IEP is not a certification. It's kind of a general term in the same way that healthcare practitioner can mean nurse or doctor or, uh, healthcare coach or whatever. So IEP is a general term of a person who's trained to seek out sources of mold and water damage and other indoor pollutants in your environment. And most people do, if they do bring in an IEP, unfortunately, they hire the wrong kind of IEP. So let's talk about what this person shouldn't do or what the investigation shouldn't look like, because I think this is what is happening more often than not. So, you do not want to hire an IEP who comes into your home. They're there 45 minutes or an hour. Most of that time is spent setting up and taking down air testing equipment. They're not going through your entire home. They're not asking you about the history of the home. They're not really paying attention to your request. Basically, they are relying on some random ambient air samples and they'll say, "All right, I'll call you in a few weeks and I'll let you know what the air testing says." That is not who you want to hire. I know you've probably talked about it in your resources. There's just a lot of limitations when you rely on just a single test or data point. So don't hire that person. There's also another group of IEPs, and these are people who are like, you know what? We're going to do an investigation and I have some fancy tools. Okay, maybe we're moving in the right direction. So let's talk about where maybe there's some shortcomings there. I've seen IEPs who literally walk in and they look around, and I've even seen them like, they'll sniff. "I don't smell anything. I don't really see anything. You're good." Now, I will say that it's super important they do that visual assessment of the home, but they need to take their time. And they need to not dismiss things like mold and water damage in attics or behind walls. I have seen IEPs who've been in the industry for 30 years, let's stick with that number, or 20 years say, mold behind a wall can't hurt you. Folks, that is a huge myth. It can. There are openings and crevices and electrical outlets where your baseboards meet the wall, other openings that allow for air movement. And so it is a problem. Air in your crawl space does make its way into your living space. It's called stack effect. So you don't want to hire someone who, one, dismisses mold and water damage because it's not one visible. Um, and I've also seen IEPs dismiss it if it's dry. Well, it's no longer wet. Well, okay, that's great. That means it's no longer growing. But stopping the moisture doesn't stop the threat. So if all they're going to do is look around and, a peek here and there, and they're not getting underneath your sinks and in behind your closets and going up into your attic and growing into your crawl space, they're maybe not going to be doing as thorough of a job as you want. On the same side, if an IEP is like, I have all these great tools, and this is going to be the answer, it's going to tell us if the home has a problem. Well, tools are a part of the inspection, but you never want to rely on just tools. People will think something like a moisture meter, which is a tool I think every homeowner or runner should have, can help identify areas that are currently wet. It's not perfect though, because it can also pick up false positives with metal. Or thermal imaging, if you've seen those. I have thermal imaging as well. It's a great tool. And people think this is like a magic mold finding tool that it can like see behind the walls. And the reality is it does not see mold behind the walls. It sees temperature differences. And temperature differences can be caused by so many things, right? Missing insulation. It can be caused by if you have like ducts, so your air or your heat's on can cause temperature differences, electrical appliances. It can be caused by moisture. So that's one of the things when you're using a thermal imaging camera, you have to, be thinking about what is this telling me? So if there's an area that comes up potentially problematic, then you follow it up with a moisture meter or some further testing. So really, the red flags there are people who are in and out in less than an hour, people who are relying only on a single test or only on a single tool. And sadly, that's what I'm seeing happen the vast majority of the time. And then people think, well, my house is fine. They didn't find anything. They didn't see anything. I must be good. And then you spend another 2 years sick because
Mhm.
you've thought you've ruled that out. You've thought you've crossed it off your checklist, and it's unfortunately still a problem potentially. So the IEP that you do wanna hire, I like to think that they do 4 things. So the first thing they're gonna do is they're going to do that thorough investigation top to bottom. They're in your attic. They're, looking underneath, and into your closets and underneath sinks. And they're going down into your crawl space. They're walking the exterior of your property and they're paying attention to drainage and grading and what am I noticing about siding and gutters and the roof and things like that. This is not a fast process. So that's step one. Do not hire an IEP, at least this is I do not recommend, who will not go into your attic or crawl space.
Mhm.
I know it's dirty and I know it's gross, but those are areas that are particularly prone to moisture issues. So you want to make sure one that they're going to do that thorough investigation. Two, you want them to take into consideration like the health of you, right? Are you noticing Man, whenever I walk into our guest bedroom slash office, I get these horrible like headaches, or whenever I'm in this room, I notice an odor after it rains. You as the homeowner are gonna be the most valuable asset to that inspector because you know your home better than anyone else. You know when something starts to not smell right or look right. You know the history. Hey, we had water come in during that big storm last year in the back door and we wiped it up and we put a fan on it. Well, maybe that addressed it. Probably not. That's something you would want to bring up. So, it's your health symptoms, it's the history of your home. And then the last one would be that they're going to be strategic in the use of their testing and tools. And so it's unfortunately not as simple as, well, just tell me what one mold test I should do in my home. And the reality is, there is no single test that will tell you everything about your home. It's not like a pregnancy test. That would be great if we got to a point where somebody invented something that could just do it. But right now, you need to be strategic. So there can be a place for air sampling if it's done right, really close to a source, maybe a wall cavity sample as part of post testing. Um, there's also surface samples. There is PCR dust testing. It's about being smart about how and why you're using a test. So most of us don't have this big pile of cash. And so what I say to people is, ask the inspector, if you run this test, how does it influence my next steps? And if it doesn't, maybe you don't run that test because your budget isn't very big, right? Because at the end of the day, mold, regardless of the type, regardless of the color, is still removed and remediated following the same standards. And so I always hate that when they're like, oh, it's just mildew, not mold. You don't need to worry about it. Nope. Moisture, microbial growth, all needs to be removed the same way. And so that's kind of like step one. And if you go to that Start Here feature, we break all of that down and more. And we have just a couple highlights I'll point out. If you're like, great, how do I find this unicorn you just described, Kendra? Well, on step one of that Start Here feature, you'll see we have all of these tips. We also have a yellow box that has some starting certifications, and you can put in your zip code and go there. But you don't stop with certifications. Those are minimum starting points. So the next thing that you would do is we have a free download, questions to ask when hiring an IEP, and it has answers. And you start vetting the people that come up on that search. And so you can start to narrow down pretty quickly. Is this someone who's gonna be in and out in 45 minutes? Or is this someone who is using keywords like, "Yeah, we're gonna use a multi-pronged approach. We're going to," we're used to working with patients who have underlying health conditions or maybe have SIRS or have, autoimmune issues. That can sometimes be a clue that this is someone who's gonna take it a little bit more seriously. And so step one is really about bringing in that first person to give you that independent assessment of what's going on in the home. Because if you jump straight to the remediator who gives you a free estimate, that's not an inspection. That's a sales
Mhm.
pitch. So the other takeaway here, and then I'll pause because I know I've been rambling for a beat now, but your free inspection or I'm sorry, your free estimate is not the same thing as an inspection. And so that's why you bring in this IEP first, because they're going to tell you what's best for you and your home, not what is fast or easiest or cheapest for the remediation company, which is what's going to happen if you go straight to the remediation company. So the last thing I'll say is that once you have that IEP report that you're going to get on your home, you then will take that to the remediation company. And that's what they quote you on, the scope of work that's written down by your IEP, and that's how you move on to step 2. So I'll pause for just a second.
Yeah, that was amazing. You nailed it. You nailed it. Every single piece of that. This is gonna be such a good resource for people. Um, yeah, I always say, like, the inspector should be writing the recipe.
Yeah,
The remediator should be cooking the recipe and
yeah.
doing following that recipe, following that plan. They shouldn't be the ones coming up and saying what needs to be done. However, to piggyback off that a little bit, I mean, if they start to open walls up, maybe there's more that's found and there's, things like that. But for the most part, the inspector needs to be the one who's coming in to do all that.
Yeah, I mean, just, like, for a side tangent here because I see it all the time, and I know I've heard you talk about this, when you came on our podcast about planning when building a home. It's the same thing. There should be no questions left to answer the day the remediation company shows up. I get people texting or emailing all the time like, "Oh my god, the remediation company's here right now and he wants to use this chemical." And I was like, "No, no, no. Everything should have been agreed ahead of time by you, by your IEP and the remediator in writing." That's everything from
Right.
what are we gonna use to damp wipe? Where is containment gonna go? Everything needs to be figured out ahead of time, and folks, like, text messages don't count. Like, I've had people who
Mm-mm.
hired someone, and they're like, "Oh, well, he texted me that, they would do that." Well, is it in the written contract? No. And then when he didn't do it, they didn't have any recourse or verbal. "Oh, well, he told me. He sounded so nice. He really wanted to help me. He felt really bad. My son was sick and he said he would do all these things and he sounded knowledgeable and I wanted to believe him because I'm stressed out," which I totally get. And then the day comes and they are tearing stuff out and it's not being done well. And now you are in panic mode because you're like, how do I fix this now? You've kind of let the proverbial cat out of the bag. And so, yeah, I think, doing this step first, even though there is a cost to it, will ultimately save you money and time and headache in the long run because they're
Mhm.
kind of like your quarterback too. Or maybe I'm bad with sports analogies. Basically, they're the person when something goes wrong during the remediation and the remediator's telling you something, you can call that IEP and be like, "Hey, they found this when they opened up the wall. It's a little different than we thought. Are you okay that they want to do this?" Right? So it just gives you that extra safety net. Do you want to talk about step 2?
Oh, yeah. Let's go for it.
So I promise I'll make this one a little shorter. So step 2 is what does that remediation look like? So there are only 7 states that require the person who is remediating your home to have gone through any kind of training. And so when I say it's like the Wild West, it really is. I'll paint a picture a little bit for you. There was a woman I was working with, and she was telling me that her and her son went through several bad remediations, and they decided that, you know what? We're going to go take a course offered by their state and we're going to become certified mold remediators. This is what the course looked like for her and her 17-year-old son. It was a 7-hour course. At no point did they have to build any kind of containment or set up any negative pressure or anything. It was all just lecture. The teacher didn't even know what mycotoxins were, which, if you don't know what those are, that's okay. You are a consumer, right? They're the poison produced by certain kinds of mold. However, an instructor certifying people in mold remediation should know what a mycotoxin is. So her and her son actually had to explain that to them and had to explain what cross contamination is. So let's unpack a little bit now about what it shouldn't look like, and then I'll tell you what it should. So, um, I'll use my own example. So I told you earlier that when we were under inspection for our house, the guy ripped the wall open without anything. Well, we had another remediation later on in that house, and I was 9 months pregnant at the time, and we noticed that stain in the ceiling. And I was on bed rest, and I just couldn't deal with it. So I called a very nice contractor who we liked, and I said, "Can you come look at this?" And he did. And he was able to take a pencil and put it through the drywall. And my only indication in that bathroom was just a little bit of paint bleeding. But the drywall was so wet because they didn't install the shower pan properly, that moisture had been leaking. So I am not in the mind space being very pregnant to deal with this. I said, "Can you please handle this?" And he said, "Sure." I said, "Do I need to be worried about mold?" And he said, "Nope. The government says that if it's less than 10 square feet, you can tear it out without any kind of containment." So let's just double click on that 10 square feet rule for a second. Is that okay? Can I go on a tangent?
Yeah.
So if you go to our government websites, it'll sometimes say if it's less than 10 square feet, you can rip it out yourself. You may have even had a landlord tell you that, or a spouse, right? Like, we don't need to pay money. We can just rip this out. That 10 square foot rule is not based on any kind of health studies. It's not based on any kind of science studies. It is arbitrary. So it doesn't take into account like the type of mold. Folks, if somebody tells you that, that's a red flag. So,
Mhm.
don't do that. Another don't do that, and this comes from my personal experience, is we were remediating a different section of our basement. And at this point, I had a 6-week-old. It happened one right after another. And I hired the remediator to do the job. I still had, at this point, never hired an IEP because I didn't learn that lesson until much later. And here is a perfect example of why you bring in an IEP. So he did the remediation. And then he did the testing himself, the post testing. And he said to me, "Well, the numbers look pretty good. I wish they were a little lower, but they're okay." And I was like, "Sleep deprived, sure, great. Let's move on. Let's put the walls back." And I did look back at that report many years later, and it should have been an automatic fail. Basically, he didn't want to go back and spend any more time in our home. And so that's why you want the separation. Another reason you want separation of the person who's going to do that post testing to make sure that it's really gone. This is microscopic particles. You can see the colony. Usually it's pretty visible. You can't see all the spores and fungal fragments and mycotoxins and things that were put off. And so that's why that testing is so important. So don't do that. Don't have the remediator do their own post testing. Don't have them pour bleach or if they rely heavily on chemicals, that's typically a red flag. There was a study done, I want to say it was in 2013. We mention it in step 2 of our website that used things like bleach, ammonia, hydrogen peroxide, even a couple commercial projects on physical mold growth. And what it found is while it often bleached the color from the surface and maybe the wiping motion removed the physical colony from the top, it couldn't penetrate deep enough below the surface to reach the root-like structures, the hyphae. So you don't want to rely on just chemicals, which is why safe and effective remediation has several components. So we can talk about that, and then I promise I'll pause. But um, when you are doing remediation, the first thing you want always is some sort of containment that's going to separate the area that's going to be having the work done from the rest of the home. And off of that main containment is a second smaller chamber called a decontamination chamber, a decon chamber. And that's where the remediator is going to put on their PPE and take it off. And that brings up the second point. So you want your IEP to basically look like the guy from ET. If you remember that movie, like spacesuits almost, right? They're not spacesuits, I'm being funny, but they're covered head to toe. So a red flag, like when I go on some mold remediators websites and you see the guys in their street clothes inside these containments, or they only have like a half face respirator and nothing else, that's a red flag. If they're not protecting their workers, chances are they're not protecting your home. And so you want full containment. The guys are going to and gals are going to be in full PPE. And in most cases, not always, the containment itself is going to be put under negative pressure. And that's different than just running like an air scrubber, which is you can think of it almost as a commercial air cleaner. But they're actually going to take the air inside that space and it's going to be vented out another window or opening to the outside. And so when we talk about, sometimes you'll hear them say engineering controls, containment, negative pressure, those are examples of engineering controls that are going to protect the workers and the rest of your home. And then you get to the actual removal. And that's really important here. You don't want to hear words like treat, bleach, those paint encapsulants, right? It's about removal. So different materials can be saved. Some need to be replaced. It just depends. So wet drywall needs to be replaced. Wet insulation needs to be replaced. Wet carpet needs to be replaced, right? Sometimes you'll have wood framing or structural pieces that have mold growth. What they do then is you don't necessarily need to remove that wood unless it's compromised. You do need to remove those top layers from the surface because of the mold growth in the roots. So that can be done through things like wire brushing, HEPA sanding, soda blasting. And so the key words that you do want to listen for are removal, right? And then the last step to all of that is they're going to do a really intense typically it's called like a HEPA pizza or HEPA sandwich cleaning inside containment, because when you start ripping open those walls, which by the way, they should do carefully. They shouldn't just be in there with like hammers knocking things down. It's almost like a surgery. They're going to go in and they're going to be very careful as they remove stuff. They're trying to minimize dust. But it does kick up a lot of particles. And so they're going to clean everything inside that containment through HEPA vacuuming and damp wiping. But that's kind of the high level overview of what it looks like. It can be time consuming. I like to say that mold remediation isn't rocket science, but it does involve science. And if anything, it's the labor cost to doing it well. I wish it was as simple as spray this magic fog in the air and your problem is gone. I wish it was as simple as spray this chemical or wipe this chemical and you're good. It really needs to be about removal, because whether mold is active and growing or dead and dormant, it's still a health hazard. You don't growing in your home. And so that's kind of a high level overview of what it should look like. But step 2 of our Start Here process breaks it down a little bit more. We have free guides, picture heavy downloads, mini classes that really give the consumer a lot of language and questions and tools. And just like the step one, we have a little yellow box with some starting certifications, and we have the companion guide questions to ask your remediator so you can start narrowing it down and finding a company who can do the job in a way that protects your health and your home and gets it right the first time, because that's what we want.
Yes, absolutely. Oh my gosh, this is amazing. I definitely wanna talk about the, post remediation verification process because I think a lot of people wanna cut that piece out to save
Yeah.
money, but I wanted to go on a side tangent on this piece because you mentioned, like, the 10 square foot rule, and, last year, I was working with somebody, um, a friend of mine actually was renting, and her landlord came in and essentially had a handyman who said, like, "No, it's this spot that we see is less than 10 feet." So what is there anything that people can do if they're renting? Like, what
Yes.
happens when someone's renting and they're going through this process? Can we just touch on that?
I would love to. Runners, yes. So we do have some resources just for runners, and if you can type that in the search bar of our website, but let's definitely break that down because my heart breaks for runners. You have so much less control. So here's usually I feel like we could have a whole episode on runners, but I'll try to keep it short.
We should.
Yeah. So for runners, the first thing that I would do is if you see a problem, right? Or something happens, like your washing machine overflows or something like that. Obviously, like shut off the water source or whatever, but take pictures and document and notify your landlord. And this is where I want you to be proactive because, like I said, in most states, it is not um, regulated. So your landlord really can do whatever they want. And, so you're gonna document it. And I suggest then that when you send it to your landlord, if it is like a mold situation that you're facing, you can use some of our resources. I would make suggestions. Like, I would like to see this remediated following the IICRC S520 standards. I found a couple companies. Would you consider these, right? Or, there's a weird odor coming from my child's bedroom and it smells moldy and musty. Would you consider hiring an indoor environmental professional to come in? Here are a couple that I found. If you rely on the landlord to find someone, chances are they're going to bring in someone who's maybe not as qualified or someone who's cheap. So that's one option. I want to put a caveat there though. If your landlord pays for the inspection, in most states, they are not legally required to give you the results. And because inspections and testing can be manipulated, if they're paying for it, chances are whoever it is they hired wants to keep a relationship with that landlord. They want to do other jobs. So if they're looking at that report and it's kind of borderline, who do you think they're going to side with? The landlord. So here is an option, and it's not without risk. Something you can consider doing is you can say to the landlord, "Hey, my child's bedroom has this musty odor. I think there's some staining. If I pay for an indoor environmental professional to come and they don't find anything, well, then that's fine. I'll be out the money. But if they do find something, will you reimburse me?" And so that's a tactic you can try. Um, you also want to check your state laws. We have an interactive policy map on our website, and you can go and click on the state that you're in. And there are some loose things on the books for renters. Sometimes you can look under warranty of habitability in your state, and it will talk about like what your rights are if the place that the landlord is providing has issues. Sometimes there's things you can do like withholding rent. I would not do that though until you have verified the laws in your state because sometimes it requires you to set up an account and you need to pay rent there. And so don't make any moves regarding paying your rent or not paying it until you've spoken with a lawyer. But I would, one, try to make it as easy as possible for your landlord to be successful by providing them with what your expectations are. Two, I would encourage you if they just especially the bigger complexes, send someone in and the guy just wants to start ripping it out right there, tell them no. Like, assert yourself. "No, this is a potential health hazard. You are not gonna start opening up this wall without any containment. I wanna see a written plan before I give permission for you to do anything in my home." I think the reality is, as a runner, if you have a problem, you have to decide, what are my goals? Am I going to try to stay and get the landlord to fix this the right way? Or do I know that this is probably not going to be handled well? And now I'm asking a different question. How do I break my lease without penalty and getting my deposit back? And so the strategy there might be the same. If you know your landlord's uncooperative, maybe you do hire an IEP and you get some um, data, right? Like showing this is mold growth, this is water damage. And then you take it to the landlord and say, hey, this is what they found. I know you're not particularly interested in fixing it. I would like to, because of the condition of this home and the risk it is to my health and safety, I would like to break this lease in an agreeable way and work with them and see if they will let you out of the lease because they see you as a bigger pain in the end, and, it's in their best interest to let you out. So, there can be some things that you do. The unfortunate reality is I think sometimes a lot of our renters end up having to move, and that's very stressful, and my heart breaks for them.
Yeah. Yeah, renting is really challenging. Like you said, you have such little control, and it's really hard to handle these situations properly because you're limited with what you can actually do.
Yeah.
But yeah, Kendra, I would love we should definitely do a renting one because I don't work most of my clients are homeowners, but I want to have more resources for renters because a lot of people are renting and a lot of these buildings and homes have issues. So we can circle back on
Yeah,
that.
I mean,
But
if you think about how do you quickly assess the rental if you're going through them, that would be great. Yeah.
right. Exactly. But going back to sort of that step 3, so you have the
Yeah.
inspection, you have the remediation, and then a very, very, very important step to follow is the PRV, which
Yes.
is the verification process at the end, and this is what I see people skipping out on all the time,
All
and
the
that
time.
ends up costing you way more money in the long run, so Kendra, take it away.
Yeah, so this will be a little shorter, but I'm so glad that you're pausing here and putting the emphasis on it that it really needs because this is expensive and people think, "Oh my gosh, now you're telling me I have to pay for that IEP to come back a second time?" Yes, and here's why. This stuff is microscopic, and even good remediation companies fail inspection or remediation sometimes. And so this is what it should look like. Your IEP is going to come back a second time, and usually within a day or two of remediation finishing. So if the remediation company finishes, the containment stays up. The engineering controls stay up. Do not start taking all that down because if there is more mold that was left behind, you've now just exposed your whole home. So it stays up. Your IEP comes, and the first thing they're going to do is they're going to do a visual inspection because if there is any debris, pieces of drywall, nails, I've seen them leave like soda cans. It's an automatic fail. You do not even need to do testing. It's a fail. That company should come back and re-clean and re-remediate that area if it fails uh, post remediation verification. So the first way it fails is visual inspection. Nope. Because if I can see that debris, I know you didn't fine particle clean and get all those tiny spores and fungal fragments. So it should be an automatic fail. Let's say it passes the visual inspection. The next thing the IEP is probably going to do is they might do some strategic testing. So they are going to run air sampling inside containment. And I know what you're thinking. Well, I thought air sampling was bad. No, it's a tool. It just has to be used well. So you're taking an air sample inside a contained space, but you're not stopping there. You're also then going to take some surface samples of the areas that were impacted to make sure that the physical growth was gone. Um, and they're also going to check moisture readings to make sure that the area is dry. That's the other thing. You have to correct the underlying moisture source. Sometimes that means bringing in another party, right? If it's a foundation issue, then you have to have someone who can, work with correcting the foundation problems. Sometimes it's easy. It's like a pipe that burst or has a pinhole leak, and then it's a plumber. But you have to correct the underlying moisture issue. So they might take some moisture readings to confirm that it's gone. And then there is a little bit of a wait for the lab and the report to come back. But here's the big takeaway: if your IEP, who you hired and works for you, looks at that report and if anything is alarming, right, or off, he's going to say this is a fail, or she is going to say this is a fail. And that remediation company should come back and re-clean and re-remediate again at no additional cost. So you don't get your remediation free, but they're coming back at no additional cost. So some real world examples of that. I'll use my own. I've had many experiences. We had this was, but by the time we were doing things right, we had an IEP come back for a bathroom, a different bathroom, and they had removed all of the tile, and it was a shower, and they found a leak up here, and they were trying to leave the tub. I get it. It was hard and awkward to move. They were trying not to cause any more disruption to the bathroom. And the IEP came in and the air sampling failed. Not by a little, but by a fair amount. The area looked clean and they couldn't see anything behind the tub. But that was a clue because there was still airborne stachybotrys in the air that there's something else probably going on. So the remediation company came back, they pulled the tub, and guess what they found? A lot more mold that they couldn't see. And if I hadn't done that testing, we would have put back that bathroom and left all that mold. And there was another pinhole leak. So you do this testing to um, verify that the money you spent, that the time that was spent, that the company you hired, that all of it accomplished the goal, which was to remove the mold. And so then your IEP really can uh, protect your investment because they're going to help you understand if the remediation was successful. And so please don't skip that step. Um, I think in the end it can cost you more in the long run. And so I I don't have numbers on this yet, and this is a study I would love for us to do. But I would say it's not uncommon sometimes for remediators to have to come back a second time. So this isn't something that, oh, companies just sometimes fail. No, it happens. And so protect yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's just we're trying to save money and then now we're paying twice.
Uh-huh.
So, doing that PRV it really is your insurance. So yeah, I can't agree more. Don't skip that step. Um, this was such a great like step-by-step process, Kendra. I mean, this is gonna be an amazing resource and hopefully can help save people a lot of time, stress, and money in the future because they just understood the process and then can access your resources. And you also have so many great resources on contracts and what those
Yeah.
contracts are supposed to look like. So for remediation. So
Yes.
if anyone's like at that point in the process and they're listening to this, just know that those resources are available too.
Yeah. Lots of downloadable guides, like step by step, what the process should look like, what should be in your contract. We want to make it as easy as possible for you to be successful.
Yeah. Yeah, what you guys are accomplishing again, it's just so wonderful that these things are available for people. And I know that we've been talking a lot about just some of the advocacy and work that you're doing. And so I would love for you to just take a moment to share what's going on with the military, the work that you're doing with the military.
Yeah, so we do a lot at the state and federal level to help like homeowners and residential spaces and renters. We want to ensure that the person remediating your home and inspecting your home is certified. We want to ensure that they're licensed. Those are the kinds of things we're working on. Well, our service members and their family, because of how military housing is structured and the laws, don't often have the same protections as you and me. So I didn't know this until I started digging into this space, but there are 700,000 service members and their families who live on military bases, which um, these are homes that are provided that provide a sense of community, and is supposed to be really a benefit to our service members and their families. And for many, it's turned out to be a little bit of a nightmare, right? We have mold growing on children's ceilings. We have lead in walls. We have asbestos that's being disturbed. We have contaminated water. And in some of these cases, I hear stories of ceilings falling in. and Band-Aid fixes really. Mold and being torn down without any kind of containment and protections. And our service members and their families are getting sick. We have had reports from the things that you would expect, right? Like, oh, asthma and allergy type symptoms. But no, seizures and alopecia, POTS, PANS, um, you name it, cancer even. And when they aren't healthy, our service members, right? When their families aren't healthy, that's not just a housing issue. That's a readiness issue. It's a national security issue, right? Um, it's a recruitment issue, and so we've been this year alone to the Hill 5 times in DC to work with policymakers, and we have brought with us military spouses and their children. We wanted these lawmakers to see behind the numbers, to see the children who were impacted, and I will say it was actually refreshing that there wasn't a single lawmaker who was, like, pro mold, and a lot of them just didn't realize the extent of the problem because this is a systemic issue. It's not limited to one house on one base. This is a problem in all of our bases. And these families are being, in many cases, gaslit and dismissed. And that's because most of these houses aren't run by the military. 99% are run by privatized military housing companies. And they're in these 50-year contracts with the government.
Wow.
And when service members call and report, we've had reports of, their requests for things to be fixed being lost or downplayed. And when they are addressed, it's not fixed appropriately or safely. There's been reports of retaliation when these service members and their families complain about the state of these homes. Um, and I'll give you just kind of a story that I think really sums it up. We have an amazing military liaison who volunteers with us. She has 5 kids, and when they moved into, military-based housing for the first time a little over 2 years ago, her kids were healthy, they had a dog, and they thought this would be a great experience to give their kids the community. Within 10 months they had asthma, they had, heart issues. The one son developed bilateral pediatric cataracts. The dog that was healthy at 4 started having seizures, went blind, stopped eating, and had to be put down. And the day they moved into that house, the relative humidity in that home was almost 80%. So, there was mold growing on vents. If you have relative humidity over 60%, you can get certain types of mold to grow just from the moisture in the air. And in the 10 months that they lived there, their health degraded severely, and they're still paying the consequences of that because when the companies finally came to address that home, they started ripping out the walls without any containment, without any PPE. The whole family was there. The dog was there. This was a 100-year-old house, and behind those walls, they found mold. We also know then we can probably assume lead or asbestos and other toxins, and that's when the dog had his final seizure and they had to put him down. That's when she had to force and beg to be put in a hotel for her family because they were so sick at this point. And so we're seeing things like this happen over and over again. So we're working on the Hill to change the laws around how mold in military housing is addressed. We're also working on a survey, uh, an anonymous survey that allows military service members and their families to accurately and without fear of retribution report what is going on in their homes. And unlike other surveys, we're asking, I think, some pretty important questions. And a lot of these questions come directly from lawmakers themselves. We want to know, are you finding mold in your home? If so, how was it addressed? How long did it take them to address? We're asking about your symptoms, the symptoms of your children. We want to know if the 3-step process that's supposed to be in place to protect you is working. We want to know all of the questions um, and answers because we want to take all of that to Congress. And so that when they make policies and change laws, that they can make data-driven, informed decisions that comes from an unbiased, trustworthy source. So we have a military support landing page on our website that you can find with other resources for military family members, because they deserve to live in healthy homes. They
Yeah.
sacrifice so much for us. The least we can do is make sure that their home is healthy and safe.
Oh, absolutely. And thank you so much for the work that you're doing. And not just in the military, but in all these different areas where and spaces that we are inhabiting as humans. And um, wow, I'm really excited to hear how it goes with that. And we'll have to do a follow up to touch on how all of that
Yeah,
goes once it's
yeah.
kind of all completed and you get the survey in and everything like that. And oh, just, like, hearing you share these stories, like, this is all so very emotionally heavy, and I'm just curious, like, what do you do to protect your own energy, to protect your soul during all of this and helping others? You give so much. What do you do to support yourself?
Wow, that's a good question. Because, like, I think just yesterday or maybe it was the day before, I was on the phone with, like, a military family, and I was nearly in tears, and I'm trying to be professional and keep it together as she's describing her husband who was diagnosed with cancer in a house where the ceiling had literally collapsed 4 times and was filled with mold, and they just told her, "You clean too much. That's why this is happening." And, so I hear stories from the military, I hear stories from the school, I hear stories from homeowners and renters just like me, and I d I don't know if why I do what I do is because I can't go back and change what happened to my family. You know, sometimes I wonder, is this how I deal with my guilt that I couldn't protect my children? And maybe this is why I do what I do. But I also do it because I know that if I had had different information, I would make different choices because, uh, looking back now, I'm at a space where I can look back on what happened to us, and I don't have that, like, trauma response anymore. And, I did wonder when I first started this, I remember talking with my husband, I was like, "Do I wanna go into this space where I hear these heartbreaking stories day after day? Like, can I handle that mentally and emotionally?" And I realized that it was my duty, like, this is I think I was put on this planet to do the role that I'm doing now, to help families and individuals navigate this safely. I was a teacher before this and I loved it. This is what I was put on this earth to do. And I will keep fighting every day because it's for me, I don't stop thinking about this. I'm in the shower. It's a Saturday. It's 7 days a week. I need to get a better hobby, but it's because there are so many families out there who need help if they only had the right information. And so I think that's what drives me.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Oh, Kendra, thank you so much for sharing and just sharing all this wisdom. This is gonna be such an incredible episode, that I'm gonna send as a resource, like, I already know. I'm just gonna be sending this out to anybody who's at the beginning of the journey and needs it, and I really like to kinda close everything out with having my guests provide, like, a piece of sage advice, a piece of, wisdom, maybe something that's, transpired for you internally from doing this work, like, how have you grown as a person? How has all of this changed you as
Yeah.
who you are?
So that is such a good question. It has been a very humbling experience, to be honest, right? Because it's not just battling the home, it's battling the medical establishment and fighting for my kids. So it's been humbling. At the same time, I think what I have really had to learn, and something that I tell anyone who I talk to about this, is please remember that this journey is about progress over perfection. You are going to make yourself mistakes. When you do, give yourself some grace and move on. because it's really easy to get caught in the, oh, I made this mistake. I did this wrong. I should have done it differently. You can't dwell there. You can't change the past. But what you can do is make different choices going forward. Even now, things still happen in my home. I make a great deal of effort to do preventative things and to stay on top of things, but it's mother nature, right? And Murphy's law or whatever, like things will happen. But I'm not that same person I was 15 years ago. I am not going to start ripping out a wall without containment now. I know if there's a problem, I know what my first step is, and I know what my second step is. And so if you made a mistake, that's okay. You pick yourself up and you move on, right? And when you have the right information, you can, not only feel empowered, but for me personally, that was one way I dealt with, like, the anxiety and the overwhelm, is I had a plan. um, I knew it was research based and, we were going to go through these steps and it was going to be okay. I didn't need perfection, but I knew that where I was going and I knew how I was going to get there. And so it's progress over perfection. And I hope that is helpful for people listening, who might be stressed out over how do I start this journey, or I'm in the middle of it. How do I finish?
That's so beautiful. And we can use that in every area of our life, every single area. Progress over perfection. I love it. Thank you so much, Kendra. I am so grateful for you. I'm so grateful for the work that you guys are doing at Change the Air. I'm going to post all of the resources in our show notes. We'll definitely leave a link so that you can get on their newsletter. If you're interested in donating to this work, I'll leave all the links below because, yeah, they offer so many valuable resources. So, I hope that you can share this episode with anyone that you know who's dealing with mold and needs to understand the first steps. So, thank you again, Kendra. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the Awakening Spaces podcast. If you're ready to take what you've learned and start applying it to your own home, then there's a few ways that we can support you. On our website, you can find a collection of free and paid guides and courses that will walk you through everything from designing a healthy home to choosing safe materials and reducing mold, chemical, and EMF exposure. And if you're looking for more personalized guidance, then we also offer one-on-one consulting and design support, where we act as your owner's representative to help you plan, manage, and execute your new build or renovation project with confidence. You can explore all of these offerings on our website at awakeningspaces.com. And if this podcast has helped you in any way, we would be so incredibly grateful if you would like, subscribe, and share this podcast so that it can reach more people. Until next time, thank you so much for listening and being here and stepping into what it means to be an awakened homeowner.